In particular, at the OECD, at the EU Commission, and some of the kind of scandalous stuff. The OECD has historically served as kind of the hub of international tax policy. I talked about the fact that we try not to double tax people, which is why when you bring that money back to the United States, you get a foreign tax credit or a tax credit against the taxes you pay. What the OECD has historically been about is letting countries get together and set harmonized rules to try and minimize or eliminate any double tax, right? At risk of a tangent here, we talk about how trade liberalization is not a zero-sum game, right? We talk about that all the time as trade economists. We say trade is not a zero-sum game. It grows the economy. You get, you trade, you have more economic growth, more jobs, et cetera. International tax policy is by definition a zero-sum game. A citizen, a business has a finite amount of income it earns every year. And so there is a finite amount of income on which it pays taxes. And if you have two different tax authorities trying to grab to impose taxes on that same dollar of income, very quickly that company is going to be in a very difficult financial position. And so the OECD has tried to avoid that. More recently, and in response to some of the scandal stuff we'll get to, they started a new project. G20 asked the OECD to lead this new project called BEPS. BEPS is an acronym. We have acronyms in tax world too. It's called Base Erosion and Profit Shifting. And this is the idea that companies had taken advantage of the rules that had been constructed to avoid double tax to reach a position of what's now called double non-taxation, in that they would structure their deals and structure their transactions in such a way as so no country had taxing authority over the dollar, or the dollar was kept in a country that had little or no tax on that type of activity. And so from this came this new belief that we had overshot on avoiding double taxation, and now we were going to come back with the premise that every dollar earned shouldn't be double taxed, but it should be taxed once. And kind of replete through the BEPS recommendations is the concept that there's some minimal level of tax that you should clear in order for the company or the taxpayer to be able to say they're good. And if you don't pay taxes, or you don't pay some minimal amount of taxes on that income, it frees up other jurisdictions to try and tax that money instead. So let's roll this back to that example we did of what the US worldwide system does. It creates this pool of income overseas that's been earned by US companies that's what we call deferred. It's sitting there, it hasn't been subject to US tax, but it hasn't been brought back to the United States either. It's kind of sitting out there. That's a big chunk of money that under the new BEPS concepts, other foreign jurisdictions can say, hey, here's this money the United States isn't taxing, I'll tax it. And that is the biggest concern about what's going on with BEPS from the standpoint of US companies. That admittedly we might have overshot on avoiding double taxation, but we've quickly overshot the other way. That leads to the next slide, which is the EU state aid investigations. This is even more recent than the BEPS. And this gets to this opportunity, well, for my EU colleagues in the room, I'm going to caveat this. This is the US perspective. This is a mechanism by which the EU looks around and says, there's a lot of money here that the US isn't taxing that we should go get, because politically it's a lot easier for us to tax the US people to pay for our government programs than it is to tax Europeans to pay for our government programs. And I'm going to go through this quickly because Gary's going to spend, I think, a little bit more, actually Gary's going to spend a lot more time on BEPS, but so we'll do this real quick. So for those of you who understand the EU treaties from a trade perspective, you can't provide subsidies, right? You can't subsidize a national champion of a specific industry, etc. The EU Commission has extended that to apply to what we would argue is regular tax policy. And so they're saying, hey, national government in UK, in Luxembourg, in Belgium, you've agreed to tax structures with these companies that we think amount to an illegal subsidy. And we are ordering you to collect X dollars in lost revenue from these companies. Now, as it turns out, US perspective, the bulk of these companies are American. So this has led to a reaction here in Washington of a view that this is discriminatory action, and it is the EU intentionally targeting US companies, again, because it's politically easier to target US companies to pay for their programs than to target European companies. And that has led to a letter from Senator Hatch, who's chairman of finance, Senator Wyden, who's a ranking Democrat on finance, and the two senior international tax members on the committee, Senator Portman and Senator Schumer, to Treasury Secretary Liu saying, hey, you need to go push back on the Europeans because we think they're targeting US firms in a discriminatory manner, to which Secretary Liu and his staff have replied, yeah, we think there's something there and we're going to go work on it. So that leads us to the scandals. Scandals in tax world are not new. They go back hundreds and hundreds of years. In today's kind of more rapid media turnaround, I think they get a little bit more airtime. So two of those are, LuxLeaks, and then even more recently, the Panama Papers. And I'm not going to focus on those two things individually. I'm going to talk about them, what they mean for the atmospherics of the international tax landscape. That, along with everything that's come before it, has energized and fed this very populist notion that we need to go after these international tax scofflaws, these big multinational firms that move money all over the world to avoid taxation. They're bad actors. Here's this list of 50 companies that's never paid corporate tax. And it just creates this atmosphere where policymakers are inclined to be much more aggressive. An example of that, Gary's going to talk about country by country reporting. It's one of the things that's come out of the BEPS recommendations. The concept was supposed to be harmonization and sharing of information among national tax authorities to make enforcement easier. One of the outgrowths of LuxLeaks and Panama Papers is a call to make that information public now, which is making public some fairly confidential and significant company-specific information. Kind of more broadly in terms of the international landscape, as I said at the beginning, the US has been pretty aggressive about continually updating its trade policy. More FTAs, WTO negotiations, trade facilitation, all these different negotiations and activities we're undertaking. Less so on the trade side, or rather less so on the tax side, but other countries have been fast. There's been lots of tax reform in lots of European countries, lots of new tax policy like a patent box which incentivizes people to put their intellectual property in a particular jurisdiction. You got a lot of lowering of corporate rates. It's creating a lot of pressure on US policymakers to act. And that's what I think what Ken was getting at in his opening comments, a growing bipartisan recognition that something needs to happen, at least on the business and international side. And we covered the targeting, what this means. And so the question is, there's allegations that that these kinds of targeting is discriminatory towards US firms. Well, that leads us to the potential tension between tax and trade obligations. We've got lots of trade obligations that say you can't discriminate against a foreign provider of a good or service. And at what point do those rules start to bleed over into what the tax policy is that other countries are starting to impose on US firms? And when does the tax policy itself become discriminatory in a way that violates a trade obligation? And that, I think, is an open question and one that folks are going to have to start spending a fair amount of time wrapping their head around.